what that is. Back in 1968, Governor Connolly and the Texas Highways Department decided to come up with 10 trails that you could drive on that would highlight a particular aspect of Texas or Texas history. The Texas Fords Trail is a 650-mile long trail that goes through 29 counties. There are other trails, but this one highlights 9 of the frontier forts that were established by the U.S. government in Texas. Now, there were 44 actual forts established in Texas in the 19th century, and there were 100 or more garrisons and encampments and presidios that are, some of which are very historically significant. But these 9 are on this particular trail, and they each one have their own history that makes them kind of interesting. Today we are en route to the Fort Phantom Hill Trail. Now, I'm familiar with some of the forts on this trail: Fort Richardson, Fort Belknap, and of course the historically significant Fort Griffin. But I'd never heard of the Fort Phantom Hill fort until recently. And it's got its own kind of strange history, and we're going to go check it out. So, stick with us. Take 2. Okay, today we are at Fort Phantom Hill. But I want you to notice something, even on the sign here before we get started, that it says post on the clear fork of the Brazos. Fort Phantom Hill was never ever really its name. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Fort Phantom Hill is one of the forts in the Texas second frontier line of defense. The first line pretty much moves south right out of Fort Worth. As the frontier moves further west, so do the forts. When Native Americans quit being a problem for one area, then they would move further west. And there are plenty of other frontier forts way west of here, all the way to El Paso and Fort Davis. But these right here in the Forts Trail are mostly from the second line of Texas forts. One of the neat things about this post is, well, it only lasted from 1851 to 1854. And as it was being abandoned, the troops that were marching to the next, wherever they were going to go, and set up a fort, they looked back and saw the fort on fire. Everybody kind of hated this fort, and there's a reason for it that I'm going to get into later. But the neat thing about it right now is that of the buildings that survived the fire, they survived quite well, unlike some of the other forts like Fort Griffin or even Fort Richardson. They don't have good solid structures. And here, as you can see, some of the buildings are in actually very good shape, and there's a reason for that I'll talk about in a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, there was not a lot of timber or water at this location, and that's because this was the wrong location. General Belknap, who was working on another post that now bears his name, sent out a captain and a company of surveyors to try to find a good location for another Texas fort. And he came up with a great location on the Pecan Bayou, which is actually in a different county. A general came and took over for General Belknap and changed the location, either accidentally or whatever. When the commander that was going to come here and build this post got here,
He didn't think it was the right idea, the right place, and he sent back word saying, this can't be right, this is a terrible location. Well, that general said, no, that's the right location. Maybe he was just mistaken, or maybe he changed it for some reason. The thought is he was new to the area and didn't know Texas at all. And so they built the post here. The little creek that goes through here dried up occasionally, and this bend of the Brazos River was not that good of water. And so it was very brackish, they said. So they dug an 80-foot well, and that well very often ran dry. And what they'd have to do is they would have to send wagons full of barrels miles away to a spring, load it up, and bring water back. This was almost a daily occurrence in the summertime. And it just didn't work out. Everybody who was stationed here hated it. Now, being a soldier in a frontier fort in Texas is harsh, no matter where you are. Fort Griffin and Fort Richardson are excellent posts. They were really good. They had lots of people there, and they had lots of resources. This one had no water, no timber to build shelters, and was hot like it is today. It was particularly harsh. Okay. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about this post in another location. Well, some of the historic forts in Texas are part of Texas Parks and Wildlife, or Texas historical sites. Others, like Fort Davis, are actually national historic sites, national historic landmarks. Not only do they take great care of it, but they have it open to the public to be able to come here and walk around and see what this post was like. I think they need to be applauded for that. But this is just part of it, some more quarters or some more things like that you can see around here. I'm not going to do a complete tour. I want you to come out here and enjoy it yourself. Life on a Texas frontier post was hard for anybody, on any post. But it was especially hard on this post. One of the reasons for that is because the post was built in the wrong place. General Belknap, who was building other forts in Texas, including one that bears his name, sent out a Captain Marcy and a company to survey locations for building another post. And he came to a great conclusion that it should be built on the Pecan Bayou, which is in the next county over. A new general came to town and took over General Belknap's command a year later, and sent a general out or a colonel out to build the new post. For some reason or another, he changed the location. Maybe he did it by accident. Maybe he just didn't know the state and the area, because he was new to this area. He had never served in Texas before. He picked this location, or the orders had this location on it. When the officer that came here to build this post got here, he said, this is a terrible location. It doesn't have timber for building structures, for shelters, nor does it have adequate water. It's terrible. And the orders were back, no, that's the place. Maybe he was mistaken about the place where he thought they were in the other place or whatever, but they decided to build the post here. They had to build their structures. Well, the stone structures you see were carted here by wagon from miles away, nothing nearby. The trees weren't grown up like they are now, but even though now they're just this scrubby stuff that doesn't make good lumber, and they would stick sticks in the ground and then kind of mud over it to make their quarters, especially for their enlisted officers or enlisted people. They didn't have what they needed. The creek that flows near here would dry up in the summertime. The Brazos River right here was very brackish and really not drinkable. They dug an 80-foot well by hand, and it would dry up in the summertime. So very often they would have to send wagons
to a spring several miles away and load them up with water and bring it here just to have enough for the day. And they had to do this almost daily in the summertime. More often than not, is what the books say. Well, this was a terrible location for that reason, and perhaps explains why it only survived here from 1851 to 1854. Behind me are the remains of the hospital area. To my left, I don't know if you can see it or not, is the chimney for what was the surgeon's quarters. And behind me, as you can see, they had lots of fireplaces or chimneys because they had lots of rooms here. One of the problems with this post is they didn't have good water and they didn't have good timber around to build buildings from. They would build their buildings out of this scrubby type material by sticking them in the ground and then kind of plastering over them, kind of like an adobe kind of thing, which wasn't really that great, but they built them out of this. Well, naturally, that kind of construction didn't survive very long. Behind me is the powder magazine for Fort Phantom Hill. Now, this simply means it's where the guns and the ammo were kept. If you could look inside here, you'd see that the walls are incredibly thick. The walls are as thick as, say, from here to here. That's for two reasons. One, to protect it from accidental discharge, and also to discourage thievery, people stealing these things. It was not uncommon for bad guys or natives or whoever to break into these things and steal the carbines and the ammunition. One of the things I find most fascinating about this fort, especially when compared to the other forts in Texas, is the name we call it, Fort Phantom Hill, was never this post's name. When you got assigned here, your orders said post on the bend of the Brazos. It was never officially called that. Now, at that time, for over 100, maybe 200 years, the custom was to name a post, a fort, after some army officer. One of the things I find interesting about this post is the fact that Fort Phantom Hill was never its name. That's what we call it today, but it never officially had a name. It was common at the time to name forts or posts after some army officer or fallen hero or someone like that. Fort Griffin is named for a general. Fort Belknap is named for General Belknap, who actually built it. It's not uncommon. Fort Brown, which is in the Rio Grande Valley down by Brownsville, was named for the first person to die in the Mexican-American War, which was a Major Brown. He was wounded in the leg, and yet he helped with morale and organizing his men and keeping the fight going for the whole time until he finally succumbed from his wounds. And then by unanimous decision, it was decided to rename Fort Texas Fort Brown in his honor. This was never known as Fort Phantom Hill. As I said, it was simply the post on the bend of the Brazos. Now, when did it begin to be called that? Who knows? It was sometime later, maybe by people who rolled up on this abandoned fort, thought it was, a phantom fort or something of that nature. Some people say that when it was even in existence, you couldn't see it from anywhere. And when you finally got to it, it just kind of like appeared out of nowhere. I don't know which of those stories I would believe at any of them. But I think it was probably a much later, it might be a 20th century name that it got. But it's called Fort Phantom Hill, even though that was never its name, and it was never actually named at all. It's one of the things I like about the story with this fort.